about that is that it speaks to people.
One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Two can be as bad as one. It's the loneliest number since the number one. One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do.
Zac Efron is easily one of the most recognizable child stars of the 2000s, but his story isn't about falling off. It's about surviving fame, redefining masculinity, and choosing a different kind of success. Zac Efron went from Disney Channel's sweetheart to global sex symbol before he was even old enough to decide who he really wanted to be. His body became a brand, his image became a product, and his teenage years were fast-tracked into something much darker than nostalgia. This isn't just a story about fame, it's about what happens when the internet and Hollywood decide who you are before you do. Today we're diving deep into Zac Efron's career and the true cost of growing up famous. Hey guys, I'm Kat, welcome to my YouTube channel, or if you're returning, welcome back. I am a small creator, so I would appreciate any support you send my way. Also, if you like this type of content, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Also, if you like my nails, give me a thumbs up, because they're adorable. Look at them. With that being said, let's get into it. Zac Efron was born on October 18th, 1987. So he's a Libra, in San Luis Obispo, California, and he was raised a few hours south in Arroyo Grande. Now, this was not Hollywood. This was a small, quiet town where his parents worked regular jobs. His father was an electrical engineer at a power plant, and his mother worked there as well. And Zac wasn't an only child growing up. He had a younger brother, Dylan, who stayed largely out of the spotlight, even as Zac's life eventually exploded into fame. Zac has described his upbringing as solidly middle class. There were no industry connections, no entertainment lineage, and no expectation that he would end up famous. His life at the beginning was normal in a way that would later feel almost ironic. Unlike many Disney stars, he didn't grow up dreaming of stardom. Acting entered his life because adults around him noticed that he could sing. When he was in middle school, a teacher encouraged him to audition for a local production, and that small nudge led to vocal lessons and community theater. He appeared in stage productions like Gypsy, Peter Pan, and Little Shop of Horrors. Zac said himself, "From day one, I got addicted to being on stage and getting the applause and laughter." These weren't stepping stones to celebrity status, but they were skill-building experiences. Zac learned how to perform, how to take direction, and how to work consistently. By his early teens, he began attending auditions in Los Angeles for television roles. His first on-screen appearances came in the early 2000s, with guest roles on shows like ER, The Guardian, and Firefly. These were brief parts, but they did give him professional experience. In 2004, he earned a recurring role on the Warner Brothers series Summerland, where he played a teenage love interest. Even then, his appeal was obvious, and he soon found himself on the set of Miracle Run, earning a Young Artist Award nomination for his role as an autistic twin. He also made guest appearances on NCIS and CSI Miami. These parts didn't make him a household name yet, but they did mark the beginning of something bigger. But of course, everything changed in 2006 when he was cast as Troy Bolton in High School Musical. The movie was produced by Disney Channel and initially intended to be modestly successful, but instead it became a cultural phenomenon. High School Musical exploded into one of the most defining franchises of the 2000s, right along with the Cheetah Girls. And by the way, I love the Cheetah Girls. Zac Efron went from being a working teen actor to a global teen idol almost overnight. And Zac was just 18 when he won the role of Troy Bolton, the charismatic captain of the basketball team, who falls headfirst into musical theater.
And you immediately start filming. For this one, we show up and we have 2 weeks of intense dance rehearsals.
Left foot, that's the key. Step forward with the left foot, left, now lean back.
On top of that, I had like 3 hours of basketball practice a day.
We're not very good.
Disney quickly leaned into his image. Zac was marketed as the perfect all-American teen boy, athletic, sensitive, wholesome, and safe. Auditioning alongside future co-star Vanessa Hudgens, their chemistry was immediate, not just as performing partners, but as two young actors forging a connection that would captivate audiences around the world. But there was a complication from the very beginning. In the first High School Musical film, Zac did not sing all of Troy's vocals. His singing voice was blended with another vocalist's, which was a decision made by the studio without his control. And this became public knowledge and later affected him deeply. It wasn't just about credit, it was an early lesson in how little ownership he had over his own image. Even as the face of the franchise, decisions about his talent and presentation were being made for him. As High School Musical became a defining project of the decade, so did the real-life romance between Zac and Vanessa. Though their relationship began quietly in 2005 as they were filming, it became public in 2006 and lasted through most of the High School Musical era, about 5 years in total, which was pretty rare for such young stars under a spotlight. Their red carpet appearances began to overshadow even the film's most iconic musical numbers, and teenagers across the globe were captivated not just by their characters, but by the idea of Zanessa, as the couple came to be popularly known. Vanessa even talked about how the relationship helped keep her grounded during an overwhelming rise to fame, saying how being with someone going through the same intense spotlight made the experience feel more stable and relatable. Around the same time High School Musical released in 2006, Zac Efron graduated Arroyo Grande High School and was accepted into the University of California but did not enroll, choosing to focus on his career instead. After the unexpected success of High School Musical in 2006, Disney moved fast. What was originally designed as a one-off television movie quickly became a franchise, and by 2007, High School Musical 2 was already in production. This time, the atmosphere on set was completely different. The cast wasn't just filming a sequel, they were carrying the weight of a cultural phenomenon that Disney now knew was worth protecting, expanding, and tightly controlling. High School Musical 2 was filmed largely in Utah, and unlike the first film, there was no uncertainty about its impact. The budget was higher, the choreography more ambitious, and the promotional machine was already in motion before filming even wrapped. Zac Efron was no longer just an actor playing Troy Bolton, he had become a symbol. Interviews, press appearances, and fan expectations followed him everywhere, and the line between who Zac was and who Troy represented began to blur. During this period, Zac's relationship with Vanessa Hudgens became increasingly public. What had started quietly during auditions evolved into one of the most closely watched young celebrity relationships of the time. They weren't just co-stars, but they were real-life extensions of a fictional love story that fans felt deeply invested in. Their relationship existed under constant observation, tied directly to the success of the franchise itself. At the same time, Zac began testing the boundaries of the image Disney had carefully built around him. In 2007, he took on the role of Link Larkin in Hairspray, a move that quietly but significantly shifted how he was perceived. On the surface, it seemed safe. Another musical, another charismatic teen role, but Hairspray marked a turning point. Link Larkin wasn't awkward or emotionally restrained like Troy Bolton.
Kiss my ass?
He was confident, flirtatious, and openly admired. The film leaned heavily into Zac's physical appeal, framing him as desirable in a way Disney never fully allowed. Tight clothing, stylized hair, and choreographed movement positioned him not just as a talented performer, but as an object of attraction. What made the moment particularly complicated was Zac's age. He was still a teenager, yet the marketing around Hairspray treated him like an adult heartthrob. Magazine spreads, red carpets, and interviews increasingly focused on his looks and appeal rather than his craft. And I feel the industry and the audience began sexualizing him openly while still expecting him to uphold the wholesome Disney image. Teen audiences adored him, adult media framed him as Hollywood's next leading man, and Zac himself was navigating all of this in real time, without the space to grow privately into adulthood. Meanwhile, High School Musical 2 premiered to record record-breaking viewership, cementing the franchise as a defining cultural force of the 2000s. With that success came even tighter control over the cast's public image. Disney leaned heavily into the clean, aspirational narrative, and Zac was expected to remain emotionally accessible, charming, and non-threatening, even as his public image was becoming increasingly sexualized outside of the Disney ecosystem. By the time High School Musical 3 senior year entered production, everything had changed again. Released theatrically in 2008, the third film marked Disney's attempt to transition its stars from cable television to mainstream Hollywood. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just a sequel, it was marketed as a cinematic event, a farewell, a graduation not just for the characters, but for the audience that had grown up alongside them. Filming High School Musical 3 carried a different emotional weight. Zac was now in his early 20s, standing at a crossroads between remaining frozen as a Disney icon and stepping into adulthood as an actor with control over his career. The themes of the film were fear of change, uncertainty about the future, pressure to choose the right path, and that mirrored exactly what Zac himself was experiencing behind the scenes. By 2010, Zac and Vanessa announced their split. They were still friends, they said, and despite occasional reunions in the public eye years later, such as when Zac briefly followed Vanessa on Instagram over a decade after their breakup, their romantic chapter had closed. When the High School Musical franchise ended, so did the version of Zac Efron that had been carefully packaged for years. He emerged from Disney fame not just famous, but branded, as a heartthrob, a sex symbol, and a representation of a very specific kind of masculinity that Hollywood would continue to demand from him. Now, the question that followed was unavoidable. Who was Zac Efron without Troy Bolton? And that question would define everything that came next. As Zac moved fully out of the Disney era, the industry still didn't quite know what to do with him. But it knew one thing for certain: his face sold tickets. His first major role after Disney came quickly. In 2009, Zac starred in 17 again, a film that was successful at the box office but symbolically complicated. While it showed his comedic timing and charm, it quite literally placed him back in a high school setting, reinforcing the idea that Hollywood still saw him as safest when he was adjacent to adolescence. It wasn't a transitional role and not a failure, but not a clean break either. In 2010, Zac made his first serious attempt to pivot with Charlie St. Cloud. The film leaned into grief, loss, and emotional vulnerability, positioning him as a dramatic lead rather than a teen idol. While the movie performed modestly, it struggled to fully change public perception. Audiences could see the effort, but the Disney association was still too strong. Zac was trying to grow up on screen in real time, and the transition wasn't seamless. By 2012, he leaned into adult romance with The Lucky One, his first major romantic drama aimed squarely at an older audience. The film was commercially successful and cemented his status as a leading man, but it also reinforced the heartthrob image he seemed unable to escape. The marketing focused heavily on his looks and emotional accessibility rather than his range as an actor, keeping him boxed into a version of masculinity that was polished, safe, and consumable. That same year, Zac made a much riskier choice with The Paperboy. The role was dark, unsettling, and intentionally uncomfortable, a stark contrast to everything audiences associated him with. While the film itself divided critics and viewers, it marked a crucial moment in his career. He wasn't just trying to be likable anymore. He was testing whether audiences would follow him into morally complicated territory, even if it meant losing the approval he'd built his career on. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure was mounting. In 2013, Zac quietly entered rehab to address struggles with alcohol. At the time, the public narrative barely paused. His career still looked successful from the outside, but this moment was a reset. Years of nonstop work, image management, and expectation had caught up with him. Rehab wasn't a scandal, it was an intervention in a career that had never truly slowed down since his teens. When Zac returned, the shift was noticeable. In 2014, he starred in Neighbors alongside Seth Rogen, a moment that became one of the most important turning points of his career. Instead of fighting his image, Zac leaned into it, exaggerating his heartthrob status and turning it into a joke. The film was a major hit, and for the first time, audiences saw Zac as self-aware, willing to parody the masculinity Hollywood had assigned to him. Neighbors proved that people would accept him outside the Disney mold, but it also revealed a new limitation. His body and image were still central to the conversation.
So, not that surprised. Your body basically was like a giant arrow pointing right towards your...
Oh my God, thank you.
No problem, man.
I think that's a compliment.
It is a compliment.
The success of Neighbors led to Neighbors 2 in 2016, which doubled down on the same formula. While the sequel didn't have the same cultural impact, it reinforced how profitable this version of Zac Efron had become. Comedic, hypermasculine, and physically self-aware. Around the same time, he appeared in Dirty Grandpa, a film that pushed shock humor and provocation to its extreme. The backlash was immediate, and for many viewers, it marked the point where playing against his image started to feel less like a subversion and more like overcorrection. But at the same time, the industry continued to reward him for his physicality, and that expectation intensified with the release of Baywatch. Released in 2017, Baywatch was positioned as a blockbuster moment. Zac's physical transformation for the role became the centerpiece of its marketing. His body was treated less like a part of a performance and more like the performance itself. Interviews fixated on his diet, his workouts, and how impossible the physique was to maintain. Zac later admitted that the level of discipline required was unsustainable and damaging, both physically and mentally. What was sold as peak masculinity came at the cost of balance, and Baywatch became less of a victory lap and more of a warning about how far expectations had escalated. That same year, Zac appeared in The Greatest Showman, along with Zendaya, which was absolutely iconic, by the way. The Greatest Showman marked a return to musical storytelling, but in a more mature context. Unlike many of his previous roles, this wasn't about his body or his sex appeal. It was about performance, movement, and ensemble storytelling. Zac's portrayal of Philip Carlyle showcased both his singing talent and his growth as an actor, and the film became a massive commercial success over time. Zac's role allowed him to reconnect with his musical theater roots all over again, and reminded audiences that he wasn't just a product of Disney, but a trained performer. In 2019, Zac took on one of the most controversial roles of his career, portraying Ted Bundy in extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. On the surface, the casting felt jarring. Zac Efron, long associated with charm and desirability, stepping into the role of one of America's most infamous criminals. But that discomfort was the point. For this role, Zac leaned into restraint. He played him as calm, articulate, and disarmingly likable, forcing the audience to confront how easily charisma can be mistaken for goodness. The performance relied less on transformation and more on implication, using Zac's own public image as part of the storytelling. Viewers weren't just watching a criminal, they were watching how trust is built, how perception is manipulated, and how danger can hide behind familiarity. The reaction was mixed. Some critics felt the film risked humanizing Bundy too much, while others argued that discomfort was intentional. A mirror held up to the audience's own instincts. Either way, the role marked a clear departure from Zac's earlier work. Around this time, Zac also began stepping further away from Hollywood's traditional center. By 2020, Zac Efron wasn't just taking a break from Hollywood, he was actively dismantling his life there. He sold his longtime Los Angeles home and relocated to Australia, a move that signaled this wasn't a temporary reset or filming escape, but genuine shift in where and how he wanted to live. This decision lined up perfectly with Down to Earth, with Zac Efron, which premiered on Netflix that same year. The series follows Zac alongside wellness expert Darren Olean as they travel the world looking into sustainability, renewable energy, and what healthy living actually looks like outside of the Hollywood bubble. And also, this was kind of a full circle moment. Dylan, Zac's little brother, was actually one of the producers in his Down to Earth series, which I thought was pretty wholesome. And Zac wasn't filming the show while clinging to a Hollywood base. He was already choosing distance. Distance from Los Angeles, from constant industry visibility, and from the version of himself that had been shaped by fame since his teenage years. The show presented a version of Zac that felt noticeably less curated. He wasn't positioned as a heartthrob or leading man, and he wasn't selling perfection. direction. He was asking questions, learning on camera, and engaging with the world in a way that felt slower and more grounded than anything he had done before. And yet, even after selling his LA home and moving across the world, the scrutiny didn't disappear. Around 2021, clips of ZAC'S started circulating online, and suddenly the conversation wasn't about the show or his career choices. It was about his face, specifically his jaw. People noticed it looked different, and almost immediately speculation took over. Plastic surgery, fillers, endless think pieces, and commentary videos dissecting his appearance like it was public property. What got lost in all of that was context, because the change people were reacting to didn't start in 2021. It started years earlier. Back in 2013, Zac was seriously injured in an accident at home. He slipped while running indoors, fell forward, and slammed his chin into the granite edge of a fountain. The impact knocked him unconscious and shattered his jaw, requiring reconstructive surgery and extensive physical therapy. Years later, Zac explained that when he stopped doing physical therapy, the muscles in his face overcompensated for the injury. Over time, that compensation changed the shape of his jaw. What people online were calling sudden was actually the result of long-term recovery finally becoming visible. But by the time that explanation surfaced, the narrative had already been written. People saw a difference and filled in the blanks themselves, as the internet always does. And once again, Zac Efron's body became the focus. Not his work, not his growth, not the fact that he had intentionally stepped away from the spotlight, which I'm sure had to be absolutely draining. During this period, Zac also dated Australian model Zanessa Valadares. Their relationship lasted about 2 years before they quietly split in late 2022. Not every project during this period landed. Films like Firestarter struggled critically, reinforcing that Zac was no longer chasing validation through success metrics. Instead, the choices felt exploratory, sometimes uneven, but increasingly honest. That honesty sharpened with gold in 2022, a film built almost entirely around isolation, physical deterioration, and psychological strain. The role demanded endurance rather than attractiveness, and the performance leaned into discomfort rather than spectacle. It marked a clear rejection of the polished masculinity that once defined him. That trajectory culminated in The Iron Claw, where Zac delivered one of the most restrained performances of his career. The role emphasized emotional repression, vulnerability, and quiet grief, a stark contrast to the hyper-visible, hyper-controlled image he carried for years. These roles weren't about reinvention for shock value. They reflected an actor who had already lived through the consequences of being reduced to an image and was now choosing complexity over approval. More recently, Zac's choices have leaned noticeably lighter, but without returning to the old formulas. Projects like Ricky Stanicky reflect a different relationship with comedy than his earlier post-Disney years. The humor is looser, more absurd, and far less invested in proving anything about masculinity or desirability. That shift continues with A Family Affair, a romantic comedy that plays directly with age, image, and celebrity perception. Instead of positioning Zac as the unquestioned fantasy, the film is aware of the dynamics surrounding him, who he's been marketed to, how that image has aged, and how it's viewed now. It's not about reclaiming heartthrob status, it's about acknowledging it with distance.
Zara, if you can hear me, name the movie I won a Teen Choice Award for.
All right.
I think she's fine.
As of now, he's not publicly dating anyone and doesn't have children, choosing instead to focus on a quieter, intentional life. Professionally, Zac continues to pick projects that reflect depth and complexity rather than spectacle. After The Iron Claw, it's clear he's no longer living to meet public expectations. He's living on his own terms, in Australia, on his own schedule, making choices that align with his life rather than the spotlight. And whether people like him or not, Hollywood has officially stamped Zac Efron as more than just a former Disney pretty boy. In 2023, he received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a moment that quietly symbolized something bigger: longevity. And that's what makes his journey so interesting. From teen idol to Hollywood heartthrob, from scrutiny over his body and image to intentional living, Zac Efron's story is less about fame and more about survival and reclaiming control over your life in a world that constantly tries to define you.